Captain Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of Harmony Point, watching the stars that dotted the endless black space around them. The massive station floated quietly between three solar systems, serving as neutral ground for the 12 species that made up the galactic concordat. Jake had been stationed here for 5 years now, and he never got tired of the view behind him. The daily morning briefing was about to begin. Representatives from different alien species gathered in the main conference room, their various forms creating a strange but familiar sight. The tall, crystal-like Veltar sparkled under the artificial lights, while the floating gas clouds that were the Zephyrians moved slowly around the room. Jake had learned to read their body language over the years, something that made him valuable. As a mediator, Ambassador Lisa Grant entered the room with her usual calm confidence. She was one of Earth's best diplomats, someone who could make peace between species that had been fighting for centuries. Lisa carried a small datapad and wore the simple blue uniform that marked her as a human representative. The aliens respected her, which was saying something considering humans had only joined the Concordat 50 years ago. "Good morning, everyone," Lisa said as she took her place at the center of the circular table. The room fell quiet immediately. Even the most aggressive species listened when she spoke. "We have a situation that needs our attention today." The Veltar representative, a being that looked like living crystal shaped into humanoid form, made a sound that their translators turned into words. "The trade dispute with the Zephyrians continues to worsen. They refuse to honor their agreements about shipping routes through our territory." The Zephyrian response came as a series of color changes in their gas form translated by their mechanical voice box. "The Veltar demand payment for space that belongs to no one. Their greed knows no limits." Jake had seen this type of argument hundreds of times. Different species, different problems, but always the same pattern. Someone felt wronged, someone else felt justified, and both sides dug in until violence seemed like the only option. That was where humans came in. Lisa held up her hand and both aliens stopped talking. "Let me understand the core issue here. The Zephyrians need to transport goods through space that the Veltar consider their territory. The Veltar want compensation for the use of that space, is that correct?" Both representatives agreed, though neither looked happy about it. "And the current shipping routes add 3 weeks to delivery times if they go around Veltar space?" Lisa continued. Again, both sides nodded. Lisa smiled. The kind of patient smile that Jake had learned meant she already had a solution in mind. "What if we create a new classification of space? Not owned by any species but managed jointly. The Veltar could collect a small fee for maintenance and security, while the Zephyrians get faster shipping times. Both species benefit, and we avoid another conflict." The room was quiet for a moment as both aliens considered this. Jake watched their faces, knowing that Lisa had just prevented what could have become a shooting war between two major species. It was what humans did best: find the middle ground that everyone else missed. Dr. Amy Johnson sat in her laboratory 3 levels below the conference room, studying biological samples from the latest First Contact mission. As the station's chief xenobiologist, she was responsible for understanding new species before they were invited to join the Concordat. Her current project involved the Korthic Empire, a militaristic species that had recently requested membership. The samples she was examining troubled her. The Korthic were aggressive by nature, their entire society built around conquest and domination. Unlike other warrior species that the Concordat had successfully integrated, the Korthic showed no signs of adapting to peaceful coexistence. Their biology seemed designed for constant conflict. Amy pulled up the communication logs from their first contact team. The Korthic had been polite enough during initial meetings, but something felt wrong. Their leaders spoke about peace while their actions suggested they were still preparing for war. Military buildup continued in their territory despite treaty negotiations. She decided to take her concerns to Commander Rick Davis, the head of human security forces on the station. Rick was a practical man who understood both military thinking and alien psychology. If anyone would take her warning seriously, it would be him. Rick was in the security center when Amy arrived, reviewing patrol reports from the outer sectors. The center was always busy, with screens showing ship movements throughout Concordat space. Human security teams worked alongside alien officers, maintaining the delicate peace that kept 12 different species from tearing each other apart. "Amy, what brings you down here?" Rick asked, looking up from his reports. "I'm worried about the Korthik," Amy said directly. "Their biology, their culture, everything about them suggests they are not ready for peaceful membership in the Concordat." Rick frowned. "The diplomatic team seems optimistic about the negotiations. That is exactly what worries me," Amy replied. "They are telling our diplomats what they want to hear, but their actions do not match their words. I have been tracking their military movements through public databases. They are building weapons, not reducing them." Before Rick could respond, an urgent alert flashed across all the screens in the security center. The communications officer called out from his station, "Commander, we are receiving distress signals from the Kepler mining colony. Multiple ships attacking civilian targets." The main screen showed grainy video footage from the colony. Massive ships with the distinctive bioorganic design of Korthik vessels were firing on defenseless mining platforms. Thousands of workers from various species were trapped as the attack continued. Rick watched in horror as the colony's defenses crumbled under the assault. This was not a military target. It was a peaceful mining operation that supplied raw materials to multiple Concordat worlds. The attackers were not trying to capture the colony, they were trying to destroy it completely. "Get me Admiral Chun." "At Earth Command," Rick ordered. "And send a priority message to Ambassador Grant. The Korthak just declared war on the entire Concordat. The attack on Kepler colony lasted 6 hours. By the time Concordat ships arrived to help, there was nothing left but debris and bodies floating in space. The Korthak had withdrawn as quickly as they had attacked, leaving behind only destruction and a clear message. The age of peace was over. Jake Morrison stood in the same observation deck where he had watched the stars that morning, but now he saw something different. In the distance, the lights of Concordat rescue ships moved through the wreckage of what had been a thriving community. The galaxy suddenly felt much more dangerous than it had 12 hours ago. Ambassador Lisa Grant was already planning emergency sessions with all Concordat members. The careful balance of peace she had spent years building was about to be tested like never before. Everyone would look to humanity for answers, expecting the same diplomatic miracles that had prevented countless wars, but as Jake watched the rescue operations continue through the night, he wondered if some problems could not be solved with words and compromise. The Korthak had just shown that they were not interested in peace, only in conquest. For the first time in 50 years, humanity might have to consider that diplomacy had its limits. Ambassador Lisa Grant sat across from the Korthak delegation in the emergency meeting chamber, trying to maintain her diplomatic composure despite the anger burning in her chest. The Kepler colony attack had killed over 15,000 civilians, including 200 human workers and their families. The images of floating bodies were still fresh in everyone's mind. The Korthak representative was a massive creature with thick, armor-like skin and multiple arms that ended in clawed hands. His name was War Leader Vorthak, a title that should have warned everyone about his intentions. He sat perfectly still as Lisa presented evidence of the unprovoked attack on the mining colony. "The territory was disputed," Vorthak said in his deep, grinding voice. "Your maps mean nothing to us. We claim that space through right of conquest." Lisa kept her voice level despite her fury. "There was no dispute. The Kepler colony has operated in that location for over 30 years. Multiple species worked there peacefully. You murdered innocent civilians." "Weakness," Vorthak replied with what might have been a smile. "Your species talks much about peace, but peace is what the strong grant to the weak. We are strong, you are weak." The other Concordat representatives watched this exchange with growing alarm. The proud Valtar delegate made angry crystalline sounds while the Zephyrian representative's gas form turned dark red with emotion. Everyone understood that traditional diplomacy was failing. General Kevin Brooks received the emergency transmission from Harmony Point while reviewing fleet positions at Earth Command. The message was brief but clear. Diplomatic negotiations with the Korthak had collapsed completely. They were demanding that the Concordat dissolve itself and submit to Korthak rule, or face total war. Kevin had been preparing for this possibility since the first reports about Korthak military buildup reached Earth. Unlike the politicians who still hoped for peaceful solutions, Kevin understood that some enemies could only be stopped by force. The problem was that the Concordat had spent so long avoiding war that most species had forgotten how to fight effectively. Captain Linda Hayes was already in Korthak space when the declaration of war came through. Her exploration vessel New Frontier had been conducting a scientific survey near the border, mapping stellar formations and collecting data on local space phenomena. Now she found herself behind enemy lines with a crew of 50 researchers and minimal weapons. Linda ordered her ship to maintain silent running while they gathered intelligence about Korthak military capabilities. What she discovered through long-range sensors horrified her beyond anything she had imagined. The Korthak had not just been building a military force, they had been creating an extermination machine. Massive bioships moved through Korthak space like living weapons, their organic hulls pulsing with unknown energy sources. Factory worlds churned out weapons designed not for conquest but for complete planetary sterilization. Most disturbing of all were the prison planets, where captured civilians from various species were being held in conditions that could only be described as torture farms. Linda's science officer, Dr. Pete Morgan, analyzed the energy signatures coming from the Korthak fleet. Captain, these are not normal weapons. They are designed to break down organic matter at the molecular level. They want to wipe out entire species and repopulate the galaxy with their own kind. Senator Paul Clark stood before the Earth Assembly, facing angry questions from representatives who demanded immediate military action. The families of the Kepler colony victims wanted justice, while others feared that humanity was leading the galaxy into a war it could not win. The Korthak have made their intentions clear, Paul said to the packed chamber. They do not want territory or resources. They want the complete elimination of all non-Korthak life in the galaxy. This is not a political conflict that can be resolved through negotiation. Representative Mary Kim from the Pacific District raised her hand. What about our allies in the Concordat? Surely they understand the threat and will support military action. Paul's expression darkened. That is where we face our greatest challenge. The other species are beginning to question human leadership. They believe our peaceful approach has encouraged Korthak aggression. The truth was even worse than Paul admitted publicly. 3 Concordat species had already withdrawn from joint defense agreements, claiming that human influence had made them weak. The Veltar were openly discussing whether humanity should be expelled from the Concordat entirely. Chief Engineer Mike Rodriguez worked around the clock to prepare the human fleet for what everyone knew was coming. The ships that had been designed for exploration and peacekeeping were being retrofitted with weapon systems that had been theoretical until now. Humanity had always maintained defensive capabilities, but they had never expected to fight a war of extinction. The retrofit process revealed something that surprised even Mike. Human ships were incredibly adaptable compared to alien designs. Where other species built vessels for specific purposes, human engineering emphasized flexibility and modification potential. What had been scientific research vessels could become effective warships with the right equipment changes. The second Korthak attack came without warning, hitting 3 different systems simultaneously. This time they targeted not just civilian colonies but also Concordat military bases and diplomatic stations. The message was clear: no one was safe, and nowhere was neutral. Captain Linda Hayes watched from her hidden position as Korthak bioships destroyed a Veltar research station with weapons that literally dissolved the crystalline structure of the aliens themselves. The screams over the communication channels lasted only seconds before the entire station was reduced to molecular dust, but the most shocking moment came when the Korthak specifically targeted human diplomatic outposts. They had prepared special weapons designed to be particularly effective against human biology. Ambassador Lisa Grant died along with 300 other human peacekeepers when their embassy ship was torn apart by bioweapons that turned human tissue into a corrosive acid. The galaxy watched in horror as the Korthik broadcast their victory. Message across all communication networks. War leader Vorthik appeared on screens throughout Concordat space, his multiple arms spread wide as he delivered his ultimatum. The weak species that call themselves the Concordat have proven they cannot protect even themselves, Vorthik declared. Your human leaders spoke of peace while preparing for war. They are liars and cowards who hide behind words instead of fighting with honor. We demand the immediate expulsion of all humans from Concordat space and the dissolution of your pathetic alliance. The emergency session of the Concordat Council was held on the neutral world of Haven, one of the few places still considered safe from Korthik attack. Representatives from 11 species gathered to decide humanity's fate, with the humans themselves excluded from the vote. Senator Paul Clark waited in a separate chamber while the aliens debated. Through the walls, he could hear the angry voices, arguing about human competence and leadership. The Veltar delegate was particularly vocal, claiming that human diplomacy had given the Korthik time to prepare their genocidal campaign. When the vote was announced, Paul felt something die inside his chest. By a margin of 8-3, the Concordat had voted to expel humanity from the alliance. They blamed human softness for encouraging Korthik aggression and demanded that all human personnel be withdrawn from Cardat space within 30 days. The Ethereals, one of the oldest and wisest species in the galaxy, cast one of the 3 votes supporting humanity. Their representative made a final statement that would be remembered for generations. You fools do not understand what you are doing, the ancient being said in a voice that sounded like wind through crystal caves. For 50 years, humans have stood between you and the darkness. They have absorbed your hatred, your fear, and your violence, transforming it into peace through sheer force of will. Now you cast them out because they could not perform another miracle. You will learn too late that some miracles come with a terrible price. Captain Jake Morrison packed his personal belongings while watching the evacuation of Harmony Point. Human personnel from across the station were loading their equipment onto transport ships, preparing to return to Earth space. The aliens who had worked alongside them for years could barely make eye contact, ashamed of their government's decision but unwilling to oppose it. Dr. Amy Johnson sealed her research data about Korthik biology into encrypted storage containers. Her warnings had been proven correct, but there was no satisfaction in being right about something so terrible. As she prepared to leave, she wondered if the galaxy would survive long enough to realize its mistake. The last human transport left Concordat space on a Tuesday morning, carrying with it 50 years of diplomatic achievement and interspecies cooperation. Behind them, the aliens celebrated their independence from human influence, believing they could handle the Korthik threat through traditional military means. They were wrong about almost everything, but they would not understand that until it was far too late to matter. President Sarah Thompson stood at the podium in the United Earth Assembly, looking out at the faces of representatives from every human world and colony. The massive chamber was filled with an unusual silence, as if everyone was holding their breath waiting for her words. Behind her, the flags of Earth's United Nations hung motionless, symbols of a species that had learned to overcome its differences through dialogue and compromise. 50 years ago, humanity joined the galactic community with hope in our hearts, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. We believed that understanding and cooperation could solve any problem, prevent any war, heal any wound between species. We dedicated ourselves to peace. Not because we were weak, but because we thought it was the right path forward. She paused, looking down at the datapad that contained casualty reports from the Korthik attacks. Hundreds of human names, people who had died trying to build bridges between worlds that now wanted nothing to do with Earth. The galaxy has made its choice, Sarah continued. They have decided that human influence is a weakness rather than a strength. They believe they can face the Korthik threat without us. We will respect their decision and withdraw all human personnel from Concordat space immediately. Senator Paul Clark sat in the front row, watching the president's face as she spoke. He had seen the classified intelligence reports that painted a grim picture of what was happening beyond human space. The Korthik were not just attacking military targets anymore, they were systematically destroying entire civilizations. One species at a time, the Veltar had been the first to fall. Their crystal cities, which had stood for thousands of years, were reduced to glowing dust by Korthik bioweapons designed specifically to break down crystalline structures. The proud warrior race that had expelled humanity from the Concordat lasted exactly 3 days against the Korthik war machine. The Zephyrians tried to use their mastery of atmospheric manipulation to create massive storms that would destroy the organic Korthik ships. Instead, they discovered that Korthik biotechnology could adapt to any environment within hours. The gaseous beings who had perfected weather control were suffocated in their own atmosphere as the Korthik turned their greatest strength against them. Dr. Helen Baker worked in the deep underground facilities of Earth's Strategic Intelligence Division, analyzing intercepted Korthik communications with growing horror. What she was reading went beyond simple conquest or even genocide. The Korthik had a plan for what they called the Great Cleansing of the Galaxy. The intercepted messages detailed how different species would be eliminated in specific orders. The militarily capable races would be destroyed first to prevent organized resistance. Then the Korthik would move on to species with useful technology or resources, taking what they needed before exterminating the creators. Finally, they would eliminate all remaining non-Korthik life and begin the process of reseeding worlds with their own colonies. Helen's team had also discovered something else in the communications. Humanity was specifically targeted for complete elimination, not because they were a military threat, but because the Korthik considered human diplomatic abilities to be dangerous. The ability to unite different species against a common enemy was seen as the greatest threat to Korthik expansion. Admiral Tony Martinez stood in Earth's primary military command center, watching real-time reports of the Korthik advance through what had been Concordat space. The alien fleets that had seemed so powerful during the expulsion of humanity were being destroyed with casual efficiency. Entire star systems were falling every day. The ethereals, those ancient beings who had supported humanity in the final vote, made their last stand at the sacred world of Lumina. Their technology was older and more sophisticated than anything else in the galaxy, weapons and defenses that had protected them for millions of years. The battle lasted 8 hours before the ethereal's final transmission reached Earth. The darkness we have long feared has finally come, the message said in the hollow, wind-like voice of their species. Humanity was our last hope for unity against this threat. Now we face extinction alone, divided by our own fear and pride. Remember us, humans, and do what we could not. Colonel Danny Wright led reconnaissance teams on the edges of Korthik-controlled space, gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions. What his teams discovered painted a picture of systematic extermination that went beyond anything in recorded history. The Korthik were not just killing their enemies. They were erasing entire cultures from existence on the former Veltar homeworld. Danny's team found massive biomechanical factories that were breaking down the bodies of dead civilians and converting the organic matter into construction materials for Korthik ships. The crystalline architecture that had defined Veltar civilization was being ground up and used as abrasive material for weapons manufacturing. But the most disturbing discovery came from the prison worlds that Captain Linda Hayes had detected months earlier. The Korthik were not just killing their captives, they were using them for biological experiments, trying to understand the genetics of different species so they could create more effective weapons against any survivors. The breaking point came when long-range sensors detected massive Korthik fleets moving toward human space. Unlike their attacks on other species, this advance was methodical and overwhelming, with bioships numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The intent was clear: humanity would not just be defeated, they would be completely erased from the galaxy. As an example to any potential resistance movements, President Thompson called an emergency cabinet meeting as the scope of the approaching threat became clear. The Korthak were bringing their entire military force to bear against Earth and its colonies, intending to finish the job that other alien species had started by isolating humanity from galactic affairs. Secretary of Defense Robert Kim presented the military analysis to the cabinet. "They are not coming to conquer us," he said grimly. "Every piece of intelligence indicates this is intended to be a complete extermination mission. They want to eliminate every human in the galaxy and broadcast the process as a warning to any species that might consider resistance." General Kevin Brooks had been preparing for this moment since the first Korthak attacks, but the scale of the approaching enemy force was beyond anything he had imagined. Traditional defensive strategies would be useless against an enemy that outnumbered human forces by more than 50 to 1 and possessed weapons specifically designed to counter human biology, but Kevin had also been studying the Korthak military doctrine during the months of their advance through Concordat space. The enemy was powerful and ruthless, but they were also predictable. They used the same tactics against every species, relying on overwhelming force and biological weapons to achieve quick victories. Dr. Helen Baker presented her final intelligence analysis to the president and her military advisors. The Korthak communications she had intercepted revealed their timeline for the human campaign. They expected to complete the extermination of humanity within 2 months, then begin the final phase of galactic cleansing. "They have made one critical mistake," Helen told the assembled leaders. "They believe we are the same species that served as mediators for 50 years. They think our diplomatic nature makes us weak and unprepared for real warfare. They do not understand that we have been studying them and every other species in the galaxy for decades." President Thompson looked around the room at her advisors, seeing the same grim determination in every face. The galaxy had abandoned humanity when they needed help the most, but that did not change the fundamental truth. If the Korthak succeeded in their plan, every intelligent species would be extinct within a generation. "The other species made their choice when they expelled us from the Concordat," Sarah said quietly. "But extinction is extinction, regardless of politics. If we do nothing, every world in the galaxy will become a Korthak breeding ground. Our children will inherit a universe of monsters." The decision was not easy, but it was inevitable. Humanity would go to war, not for the aliens who had betrayed them, but for the principle that genocide should never be allowed to succeed. They would fight alone if necessary, but they would fight with everything they had learned during 50 years of careful observation and preparation. The next morning, President Thompson addressed not just Earth but every surviving world in the galaxy. Her words were broadcast on all frequencies, in all languages, reaching even the scattered refugees who had fled the Korthak advance. "The galaxy chose to face this threat without humanity," she said, her voice carrying across the stars with quiet determination. "So be it. But understand this, we will not allow the complete extinction of intelligent life to occur without resistance. Humanity goes to war not for those who abandoned us, but for those who cannot defend themselves, and for the future of all sentient beings." The age of human diplomacy was over. The age of human warfare was about to begin. Fleet Admiral Chris Anderson stood on the bridge of the battleship Vengeance, watching as the largest military fleet in human history assembled around Earth. Ships that had been exploring distant stars for decades were returning home, their scientific equipment replaced with weapons that no alien species had ever seen. The transformation was remarkable. Vessels designed for peace had become instruments of war in a matter of months. Dr. Rachel Miller worked in the secured laboratories beneath Earth's surface, putting the finishing touches on weapon systems that would have been unthinkable during the diplomatic years. For 50 years, while serving as mediators and peacekeepers, human scientists had been quietly studying every alien technology they encountered. Now that knowledge was being turned into tools of destruction, the Korthak bioweapons that had devastated other species were no mystery to human researchers. Dr. Miller's team had analyzed samples from every attack, understanding not just how the weapons worked, but how to neutralize them. More importantly, they had developed countermeasures that could turn Korthic biological advantages into weaknesses. "The irony is perfect," Rachel said to her lead researcher as they loaded the new weapons onto transport ships. "They created these bioweapons by studying the species they conquered. Now we are going to destroy them using the same approach, but with 50 years of diplomatic intelligence gathering behind us." Captain Kelly Brown received her orders while the battleship Retribution was still being retrofitted with the new weapon systems. Her mission was simple in concept but terrifying in scope: lead the human vanguard in the liberation of occupied Korthek territory. No human military force had ever attempted anything on this scale. Kelly had served on exploration missions for 15 years before the war began. She had visited dozens of alien worlds, learned their languages, and understood their cultures in ways that pure military officers never could. That diplomatic experience was now her greatest tactical advantage. The first battle came at the Rigel system, where Korthek bioships had established a forward base for their planned assault on human space. Kelly's fleet dropped out of hyperspace in a formation that confused the enemy commanders. Instead of the organized military patterns they expected, human ships moved like a living organism, adapting and shifting in response to enemy fire. The Korthek bioweapons that had dissolved Veltar crystal cities had no effect on human ships protected by energy shields based on Zephyrian atmospheric manipulation technology. The directed evolution viruses that had corrupted ethereal defenses were neutralized by medical countermeasures derived from studying dozens of different species immune systems, but the real shock came when human weapons began tearing through Korthek bioships like they were made of paper. Dr. Miller's team had created weapons that specifically targeted the organic components of enemy vessels, turning their greatest strength into a critical vulnerability. Major Steve Wilson led the first human ground assault on a Korthek-occupied world, a former Veltar colony where thousands of survivors were being held in prison camps. Steve had studied Korthek ground tactics for months, understanding that their entire military doctrine was based on intimidation and overwhelming biological superiority. Human ground forces used tactics that no alien species had ever employed. They fought not just to win, but to rescue and protect civilian populations. While Korthek warriors expected to face desperate last stands by defenders trying to save their own species, they instead encountered humans who fought with equal intensity to save alien civilians. They had never met. The battle for New Veltar lasted 3 days. Steve's forces used adaptive tactics that changed hourly, preventing the Korthek from developing effective countermeasures. When bioweapons were deployed against human soldiers, portable medical units neutralized the effects within minutes. When Korthak reinforcements arrived, human ships provided surgical orbital strikes that eliminated enemy forces without harming civilian areas. The most shocking moment came when Steve's forces breached the main prison compound. The Korthak had expected their captives to be weak and broken after months of torture and experimentation. Instead, they found that the rescued civilians immediately joined the fight, using improvised weapons to help humans eliminate their captors. Fleet Admiral Anderson watched the tactical reports flooding into Earth Command with amazement. Human forces were not just winning battles, they were achieving impossible victories that defied every military doctrine in the galaxy. The same species that had spent 50 years avoiding conflict was demonstrating capabilities that no enemy could have predicted. Operation Righteous Fury expanded beyond anything originally planned. What had started as a defensive campaign to protect human space became a systematic liberation of every world under Korthek control. Human fleets moved through occupied territory like an unstoppable force, freeing entire species that had been written off as extinct. Captain Linda Hayes found herself commanding a task force responsible for liberating the research stations where Korthek scientists were conducting biological experiments on captured civilians. The horrors she discovered there hardened her resolve in ways that diplomatic service Never could have. The Korthak had been trying to understand how different species' biological systems worked, hoping to create more effective weapons for their final extermination campaigns. What they had actually created was a database of alien vulnerabilities that human forces could use to provide better medical care for rescued populations. They were so focused on how to kill us that they accidentally showed us how to save each other. Linda reported to Fleet Command after liberating the 4th Research Station. Every torture they inflicted taught us something about alien biology that we can use to help survivors recover. Dr. Helen Baker coordinated intelligence operations from Earth, analyzing intercepted Korthak communications to understand how the enemy was responding to human military success. What she discovered revealed the depth of Korthak miscalculation. About human capabilities. The enemy leadership was in complete chaos. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that other species would fight to save only themselves. They had no tactical response to humans who fought with equal determination to save alien civilians, often at greater risk to their own forces. Korthak field commanders were sending increasingly desperate messages to their high command, requesting guidance on how to counter human tactics that seemed to defy logic. How do you fight an enemy that becomes more dangerous when protecting others than when protecting themselves? The liberation of the ethereal homeworld marked the turning point in galactic opinion about human military capabilities. The ancient world of Lumia had been considered permanently lost after the ethereal's final stand months earlier. Human forces not only retook the planet but discovered that several thousand ethereals had survived in underground shelters. The rescued ethereals were the first to understand what humanity had become during their transformation from diplomats to warriors. As beings who had lived for millions of years, they recognized something that other species missed. Humans had not abandoned their diplomatic nature, they had weaponized it. You fight not with hatred but with purpose. The eldest surviving ethereal told Admiral Anderson during the liberation ceremony, "Your species learned to understand us so well that you can save us from ourselves? This is not conquest, this is the ultimate expression of your diplomatic nature." Colonel Danny Wright led deep reconnaissance missions into the heart of Korthak territory, gathering intelligence about enemy industrial capacity and military reserves. What he found confirmed humanity's worst fears about Korthak intentions, but also revealed critical weaknesses in their empire. The Korthak had built their entire civilization around conquest and expansion. They had no experience with defensive warfare or long-term resistance movements. Their bioships were incredibly powerful but required massive amounts of organic material to maintain, material that had come from conquered species. With human forces systematically liberating occupied worlds, the Korthak were facing resource shortages for the first time in their history. Their greatest weapons were becoming impossible to maintain as the supply of conquered populations dried up. General Kevin Brooks coordinated the final phase of Operation Righteous Fury from his command center on Earth. The campaign that had started as a desperate defense of human space had become the complete dismantling of the Korthak Empire. Enemy forces were retreating toward their home systems, leaving behind liberated worlds and rescued populations, but Kevin understood that victory in battle was only the beginning of humanity's challenges. The galaxy had watched humans transform from peaceful mediators into the most effective military force in known history. Some species would be grateful for their liberation, while others would fear human power more than they had ever feared the Korthak. The final battle took place in the Korthak home system, where the last remnants of their bio-fleet made a desperate stand around their breeding worlds. Human forces faced the most dangerous Korthak weapons and tactics, but they also fought with the knowledge that failure would mean the eventual return of genocidal expansion. Captain Kelly Brown led the assault. On the primary Korthak command ship, a massive bio-vessel, Admiral Lisa Chun stood in the command center of the orbital station above New Veltar, watching as human ships coordinated the largest refugee resettlement operation in galactic history. Millions of civilians from dozens of species were being relocated to their original homeworlds or to new colonies where they could rebuild their civilizations. The logistics were staggering, but humanity had learned to organize complex operations during 50 years of diplomatic service. The irony was not lost on anyone. The same organizational skills that had made humans effective mediators were now being used to manage the aftermath of total war. Every detail that diplomats had once used to understand alien cultures was now essential for helping those cultures survive and recover. Captain Alex Turner oversaw the war crimes tribunals taking place on 12 different worlds. The captured Korthik leadership faced justice for their attempted genocide, but the proceedings revealed disturbing evidence about other species' actions during the war. Some alien governments had collaborated with the Korthik, hoping to be spared by helping with the extermination of their neighbors. The trials were broadcast throughout the galaxy, showing everyone that human justice applied equally to all species. Korthik war criminals faced the same legal standards as alien collaborators who had betrayed their own people. Several Veltar officials who had helped coordinate attacks on refugee ships were sentenced alongside the monsters they had served. Justice is not about revenge, Alex explained to the galactic media during one of his briefings. It is about ensuring that the mistakes which led to this genocide never happen again. Every species, including humanity, must be held accountable for their choices during the crisis. President Sarah Thompson received the delegation from the Reformed Galactic Council in her office on Earth, surrounded by the flags of human worlds that had contributed to the war effort. The alien representatives looked uncomfortable as they waited for her response to their formal apology and request for renewed diplomatic relations. The delegation was led by the surviving, ethereal elder who had witnessed the liberation of Lumina. Behind him stood representatives from every species that had expelled humanity from the original Concordat months earlier. They carried offers of territory, technology, and resources, anything to repair the relationship they had destroyed through fear and prejudice. "We acknowledge our error in judgment," the ethereal said in his wind-like voice. "We allowed fear to cloud our wisdom and cast out the one species capable of uniting us against the darkness. We humbly request forgiveness and the restoration of diplomatic relations." Sarah looked at each alien representative in turn, remembering the faces of human diplomats who had died trying to prevent exactly this situation. Ambassador Lisa Grant's sacrifice, along with hundreds of others, had been necessary only because these same beings had refused to listen to human warnings about the Korthik threat. "Forgiveness is not mine to give," Sarah replied quietly. "That belongs to the families of the humans who died because of your decision. What I can offer is a new relationship based on different terms than before." Ambassador John Smith addressed the emergency session of the Reformed Galactic Council, speaking to representatives from species that were still recovering from near extinction. The great chamber that had once echoed with debates about trade routes and territorial disputes now hosted discussions about survival and reconstruction. John was different from the diplomats who had served before the war. He had been a military analyst during the Korthak campaign, someone who understood both the capabilities humanity had revealed and the fear those capabilities generated in alien minds. His approach to diplomacy was informed by the knowledge that humanity could no longer be ignored or dismissed. "For 50 years, humanity sought partnership as equals," John said to the assembled delegates. "We mediated your disputes, protected your civilians, and died for your causes. When you expelled us, we learned that equality must be earned through strength rather than granted through goodwill." The alien delegates listened with expressions that ranged from shame to barely controlled terror. They had seen human military forces dismantle the most powerful empire in galactic history with surgical precision. Now they faced the prospect of dealing with a humanity that no longer needed their approval or cooperation. "The new galactic order will be based on different principles," John continued. "Humanity will protect those who prove they deserve protection. We will cooperate with those who demonstrate they can be trusted. But we will never again allow ourselves to be made vulnerable by misplaced faith in alien wisdom." General Mary Johnson coordinated reconstruction efforts across 47 worlds that had been devastated by Korthik occupation. The scale of destruction was beyond anything in recorded history, but human organizational capabilities were proving equal to the challenge. Engineering teams worked alongside alien survivors to rebuild not just cities but entire civilizations. The reconstruction process revealed how thoroughly humans had studied alien cultures during their diplomatic years. Human engineers understood Veltar crystal growing techniques better than most Veltar survivors. Human biologists could restore Zephyrian atmospheric systems more efficiently than the gaseous beings themselves, but the most significant change was in the attitude of alien populations toward human presence. Where once human advisors had been politely tolerated, now they were desperately needed. Species that had dismissed human suggestions for decades now depended on human expertise for their very survival. Dr. Helen Baker analyzed public opinion data from across the recovering galaxy, tracking how different species viewed humanity's transformation from diplomats to protectors. The results painted a complex picture of gratitude mixed with fear, respect combined with resentment. Younger aliens who had grown up during the war tended to view humans as heroic saviors who had rescued the galaxy from extinction, but older generations, particularly those who remembered the pre-war period, struggled to reconcile their memories of gentle human mediators with the reality of human military supremacy. "They are grateful that we saved them," Helen reported to the Earth government. "But they are also terrified that we might decide to stop saving them." For the first time in galactic history, one species has demonstrated the capability to protect or destroy all others at will. Colonel Danny Wright led the ongoing security operations that kept the peace between species still recovering from the trauma of near extinction. Human peacekeeping forces were stationed on every major world, not as occupiers but as guarantors of stability. Their presence prevented the kind of desperate resource conflicts that typically followed galactic catastrophes. The security missions revealed how fundamentally the balance of power had shifted. Alien governments that had once barely acknowledged human authority now requested permission before making major policy decisions. Trade disputes were settled not through lengthy negotiations but through appeals to human arbitrators whose decisions were accepted without question. Captain Jake Morrison returned to his old observation deck aboard the rebuilt Harmony Point, now the headquarters of the new Galactic Protectorate. The view of space looked the same as it had before the war, but everything else had changed beyond recognition. The same stars shone down on a galaxy where humanity was no longer one voice among many, but the voice that mattered most in any crisis. The daily briefings that had once focused on mediating minor disputes between species now dealt with coordinating the protection and development of entire civilizations. Human decisions affected the lives of billions of beings across hundreds of worlds, a responsibility that weighed heavily on every person involved. President Thompson delivered her final address about the war to a joint session of Earth's government and the Galactic Protectorate Council. The speech was broadcast to every inhabited world, reaching alien populations who now looked to humanity for leadership they had once rejected. "We did not seek the role that history has given us," Sarah said to the assembled representatives. "We wanted to be partners and equals in a community of species working together for mutual benefit. But when that dream failed, we chose to become protectors rather than allow genocide to succeed." She paused, looking out at the mix of human and alien faces in the audience. The aliens watched her with expressions of respect born from fear, while the humans showed the weight of responsibility they had never wanted but could not abandon. "The galaxy is at peace today, not because we chose peace over war, but because we proved that war has consequences for those who choose to break peace. Every species under our protection understands that their safety depends on their willingness to coexist with their neighbors." The new galactic order was neither the diplomatic partnership that humanity had originally sought nor the military conquest that other species feared. It was something unprecedented, a civilization based on the principle that peace could only be maintained by those strong enough to enforce justice and wise enough to use that strength responsibly. In schools across the galaxy, alien children learned about the Great Awakening, the period when humanity revealed its true nature as both protector and destroyer. They studied the mistakes that had led to the Korthic War and the human response that had prevented total extinction.